and welcome to What's Your History, the podcast that covers all areas of history, heritage and archaeology, no matter how big or how small, how well known or how niche. Today's guest is Jo Romero. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her last name right. But she is the author of a book called Forgotten Women of the Wars of the Roses, and she spoke to me about her book, about her interest in women's history in particular, and I hope you will enjoy this episode as much as I did.
Thank you for agreeing for coming on to this and for sharing some more Wars of the Roses history with us today.
Excellent. Thank you for inviting me.
It's all right. So I guess the big question is, what made you want to focus on these forgotten women?
I always loved the stories of medieval women, and I always felt like when I did history, and I did it at university and at college, I always just kind of felt like we didn't really talk about them, and it was all about, you know, the Duke of York and whoever, Henry Tudor, but like nobody really talked a lot about the countesses and the duchesses that were all involved. And then taking that onto another level, it was like, well, no one talks about the innkeepers and the midwives and those sorts of things. And I just started to delve a little bit, and I found that they all had such a rich story that gave us a whole other context to the whole Wars of the Roses. So it was really that I always was fascinated by women's history, and I did it as my dissertation when I was at uni years ago. It was about women in medieval Yorkshire, so that uncovered a lot of those sort of roles as well. So that's really why.
Oh, wonderful. That's actually really cool, actually, the fact that you decided to look for women in Yorkshire as well, because I suppose, again, with a lot of this history, it's always focusing on London, the capital and stuff. So while you were going through this research, who's the women that stuck out to you the most?
I just really had a soft spot for the women that we haven't talked a lot about. So there was an innkeeper called Joan Connis, and she managed an inn while the Battle of St Albans was going on in St Albans Centre. And it turns out that I found a deed that said that she was owning the inn during the time that the Second Battle of St Albans took place. So it was like, well, she was there then, or her family were there. You can kind of place these women in these places. There was also a woman in Reading. There was a lady called Jane Bowyer and Elizabeth Clerk, both ladies in Reading, different times. But Elizabeth Clerk would have seen, you know, the Elizabeth Woodville being shown to the court at Reading Abbey in 1464. Like, yeah. She just lived a stone's throw away from the Abbey, and she was a draper's wife. And I managed to uncover a lot about her and, you know, about her husband and the sort of where they would have lived. And it's just, you kind of like place these women where they were. Like, they're not really complete, and they're like shadows. It was nice to bring them out of the shadows. Another woman I loved was Joan Cannings in Bristol. She was the wife of a mayor, William Cannings. And when you go to Bristol, you just see stained glass windows of William Cannings and portraits of him and sculptures. And he's like, oh, yes, he was an amazing mayor. And I guess he was. But his wife, too. And there's so much evidence that wives of mayors, and he was a very successful merchant. There's evidence that the wives helped, and they knew the merchant activity of their husbands, because after their deaths, a lot of them carried on the business. So uncovering Joan and standing in front of her effigy, she's lying next to William in one of the churches in Bristol. And I just looked at her and thought, gosh, like, I don't think anyone comes to see her. They all come to see William Cannings, and she's just laying next to him. But that day I went to see her. So it was nice to, you know, do her a favour, I think. And kind of bring her back. And that was really cool as well, because I managed to find where they lived, and their house still survives. It's a little bit moved around and changed up a little. You can't go in, it's a private place, but it was still cool to stand there and see where they would have gone in and out. Yeah, really cool.
And it sounds like a really fantastic project, in all fairness, being able to look at these women. And by the sounds of it, it's just everyday women as well, because that's the one thing I have a love-hate relationship with history, because it always focuses on the kings and the queens and things, which is great, but it's those people that are around them. It's like knowing, how did this person becoming king affect this person, or what did they witness and things. Like you were saying about the first lady, about Elizabeth Woodall, it's like she would have seen her going to the Undercroft with the family as well later on, I'm assuming, or was she not around at that point?
It was Reading Abbey where she was introduced to the court. So that was when Edward first went, oh yeah, by the way, I've married this lady, and everyone was a bit, oh my gosh. And it was said that the Earl of Warwick, he fell out with him over this, and there was an ambassador wrote that in Reading, where the king is, everyone's trying to annul this marriage, and it was all going on like in this town. But who ever thinks of Reading as part of the Wars of the Roses? I mean, I live here, and I don't see much being said about it. So it was nice to like bring also like a lady in as well who lived there. But yes, of course, there was also when she fled to Sanctuary in Westminster, and then she had a baby there, and that was I think it was Marjorie Cobb, the midwife, who helped her give birth to her son there. That was another scary time. So yeah, Marjorie would have had to have been let in. If you just use your imagination, I think, what it would have been like for Marjorie to have gone in with this sort of ex-queen, sort of the enemy queen who's having a son. Yeah, must have been quite a bit of skullduggery going on, I imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was really cool. Midwives are really important with the Wars of the Roses because they're helping to start this new dynasty. They're all trying to legitimize and have healthy children to carry things on so that this doesn't happen again. So the pressure must have been quite a lot on them, on the royal midwives.
Yeah, because they're having to make sure that child survives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the nurses. There was also nurses in the book that I talked about. There was a lovely name of a nurse. I think she was a nurse of one of Henry VII's children, and her name was Alice Bwimble. I just love that name. But yes, and there's even evidence that shows what they were paid. We've got letters where Henry was sort of chasing up the people who had the purse, and he was like, "Look, can you hurry up and pay them because they need being paid?" I thought that was quite nice.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. And yeah, just this in general, just focusing on the women in general is just it's fascinating because they are often forgotten parts of history, but they were there. They witnessed things. They sometimes weave some of the webs and stuff. So did you write about Anne Neville as well in your book?
Yes, I love Anne Neville. I did write about her. So I read a few. There wasn't at the time a lot of good biographies of Anne Neville. I know one's just come out, which I need to read. Haven't got one yet. But the only places I could go was sort of primary sources, and then places where people had mentioned Anne Neville for a little bit. And I just tried to make my own mind up about what Anne Neville might have felt and what she might have thought. And she's very much painted, I think, by older historians back in time, like Agnes Strickland and this, as a very sort of depressed, tragic queen. Oh, poor lady, she was the queen of Richard III, this sort of thing. She didn't do very much. But when you look, there isn't a lot of evidence about Anne Neville because she was only queen for a couple of years, and people don't really give her a lot of thought or a lot of credit up till now. But if you look at her family history and you look at some of the very powerful and influential aunts, and like her mum was a force to be reckoned with as well, and you just think maybe you weren't such a little shy, timid little thing. So I think there's very much more to Anne Neville than people generally think, and I don't think she was just tragic and depressed. I think there's this, it's just sad to put somebody from history in a box, isn't it, and just never let them out of there. So I did maybe think about how she might have made decisions, like she might have made the decision to marry Richard when before he became king. There's a lot more to it. If you take all that preconception out, there's a lot more to Anne Neville that you can start to think about. But she's one of my favorites. And I did a portrait of her as well to coincide with the book. It's not in the book, but I did a lovely pencil portrait of Anne Neville to try and bring her back to life a little bit for us. Yeah, so bit of a lady crush on Anne Neville maybe, but yeah, I think she's great.
Oh, that's lovely. So when you were doing your research, what did you find about Anne Neville? Because you have just said that people like her tend to get put into pigeonholed, and for a very long time there has been a lot of negativity floating around Richard III, for example. So it's understandable that he's portrayed as this villain because he was the threat to the Tudors at the end of the day, but he is seen as just this really horrible person for nearly every historian pretty much portrays him in this way for some reason, except for Philippa Langley. But it's just like it's very fascinating. It's like, do you feel that that's a true representation and that she was forced into it, that she was unhappy with that, or do you think they might have actually had a stronger connection than that? Because I think he grew up in where she lived, didn't he?
Yes, they knew each other before. I think through sort of childhood or late childhood anyway. But I seem to think I come to the sort of conclusion that I think that Anne may have made a conscious decision to marry Richard because it was quite a good, clever thing to do. Because if you think that her husband, her husband, who she was married to the prince before, the Lancastrian prince, like he was killed in battle. Her dad was dead. Her mum was imprisoned, and you're just like, oh, and a sister too. A sister was married to Richard's brother, and you kind of just think, well, what would I do? You know, if I had this guy who's the brother of the king, who I've known since childhood. I don't know who I'm going to be married to. You know, could I just be with Edward? Might he just marry me off to anyone? And I'll have to start again. And you sort of think, well, it would have been quite an intelligent thing to do, actually, to marry Richard, someone you knew. So I kind of think we need to give her a bit of, you know, that she came up with that idea. So yeah, definitely. I think that she was more intelligent and thoughtful, and we need to give her some credit, I think, for that, rather than just being sort of floated along. Doing what everyone else wanted. I don't think that was Anne Neville at all. And there was one book I read, I think it was Sarah Griswold's book, and in there it said that there was evidence that Anne actually had offered to help the city of York in Richard's absence. So she had offered herself and said, well, you know, if you need any help, let me know. So if she's offering that, you think, well, she must have felt herself capable to have taken over while Richard wasn't there. So it's just so little evidence for her, I think, for her life. So it's easy to kind of just assume. But there's little hints that we say, well, hang on, no. You know, she was more strong and more thoughtful than this.
Yeah, and I think we've also got to remember that these were people who had their own thoughts and stuff. And I know that we can be a bit biased and be like, oh, from my modern perspective, I would say this. But you can see the evidence from other women of those time periods as well and how they responded to their other halves or the situations around them. So it's like, I think we need to step away from this idea that every woman was demure and so feeble, I can't do anything, because we know that's not true.
Oh no, and there's an amazing story of Ellen Gethin, and she's been portrayed as a sort of a mythical figure there was this book, and I think it was a very late 19th century book, and talked about Ellen Gethin, you know, this woman who killed her cousin because he murdered her brother, so she took revenge and killed him apparently with a bow and arrow. And but you can trace her to a real person. So she was a real person that later lost a husband in the Wars of the Roses in the late 1460s. You think, well, maybe the other thing was also true if she's actually a real person. So yeah, they were feisty, and there's lots of stories of like Elizabeth Treffry, you know, defending her home against people coming in, like soldiers. There's a lot of stories like that that I put in the book, and that was quite cool. Alice Nivet as well, she was good. She stood on the drawbridge, and Edward IV's men had come to take her castle, and her husband was away, and she basically said, no, you can't have my castle because my husband said that I have to keep it safe while he's away, and if you don't kill me, he will, so you can't have it. So she was so brave, and she stood there with, like, you know, this makeshift little army that she managed to get all her servants up, like holding, don't know, pitchforks or whatever. But she drove them away, and in the end he left her alone, so good on her.
Yeah.
Yeah, feisty ladies.
Yeah. Oh, that's it's really cool. So when you were doing this sort of research, what is it that made you decide to focus on the Wars of the Roses? Why not any other period?
I always loved knights, and when I was a kid, dragons and things like that, and I just always loved this, and that's why I chose medieval history when I did my degree. I wanted to do this, but then I was looking at the Wars of the Roses, and I wrote an article for the Historians magazine, sort of towards its very beginning, about the forgotten women of the Wars of the Roses. This was ages ago, and it had like 3 people in it or something like that. It had just a snapshot of some. No one like I'd really discovered myself. It was like Margaret Paston or whatever, these sort of people. And a publisher saw it, the Pen and Sword Publishing saw, and went, "Oh, do you want to write a book on this?" And I thought,
Oh,
well, yeah,
wow.
that's a pretty cool idea. So we decided that I would go really deep and find all these ladies that haven't been talked about, like silk women. Oh my gosh, there was even a jailer. There was a woman jailer in the Fleet prison who was leading people through her corridors and, locking them up or letting them go. And there's even a little bit of evidence that she helped a lady give birth in there
Oh,
while she
wow.
was in the prison. Yeah, so, but that was how I got into the Wars of the Roses. It's just such a fascinating, there's so much going on. It's such a turbulent time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what led me to the Wars of the Roses. I love medieval history, and also I got sort of asked to do it in the end. But yeah, I absolutely loved it.
Oh, that's really cool, and the fact that you got asked to do that as well, that's kudos to you.
I always say it's sort of right place, right time, maybe, but I love doing it. It was such good fun, and I love like bringing, like on my blog as well, I really love bringing out the stories of forgotten people. I just feel like we need to give them a chance. Like you say, it's all about kings and queens and princesses and princes, but that did affect everybody. The things they did affected others, and it all goes down like a little, I don't know, like a dominoes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that fascinates me the most, because it's like, because I'm from an archaeological background, so I focus on us. I focus on the everyday people, and it's interesting while doing those sort of researches and things that, depending on whereabouts in the country, it would depend on how much these situations were affecting you. Now, clearly, the Wars of the Roses, which was a civil war, would have affected everybody, because you're having to take up arms regardless, and you're going to be on one side or the other, whether you believed it or not, because you had no choice. But ultimately, when you've got a king on the throne, and I don't think the general public are really going to care who he's sleeping with or how many kids he's having. I think most of them are just like, "Oh, he's had a son, has he? Good for him."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're like, that's nice. Yeah, exactly. And I think another misconception about the Wars of the Roses is that it only affected the nobility, and it didn't. It absolutely affected everybody at all levels, and that's something I found when I was reading as well and doing all my research. Like, definitely, like, you can't just say the Wars of the Roses, because that's what I learned at school. They said, "Oh, the Wars of the Roses," we didn't really know about it much. It was all the rich people, but everybody felt it. Everybody, from all walks of life would have known. Especially if you lived in St Albans and they were fighting in the town, like they were, in the town centre. Like, oh my gosh, imagine that.
Yeah.
So running back into your house, I guess, and just like bolting the doors and not coming out. But yeah, it's I love to bring that side of things, like to make it personal. I always think, what would people like us have been doing?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, because it is so true at the end of the day, because it's the same with all the other wars that happen as well, because we have other civil wars that go through that same sort of situation. And you can just imagine like that everyday person going, "Right, darling, I'm going to go to work. I'm not going to work today because some guys are fighting."
Yeah, maybe I'll just stay home. Then you go back in. Yeah, that's what I did. I started to think about Joan Connis, this innkeeper there, and I think it was the my brain's gone, but I think it was the White Swan, or the Swan in St Albans. So you just imagine her like clearing away tables, and then thinking, okay, there's a lot of soldiers about. What's going on there? Like thinking, oh well, maybe that's good trade. They'll be staying the night, and then next morning it all begins. So it's nice to put yourself into their sort of place for a little while. Yeah, it's good.
Oh, this just sounds really, really cool. So I have ordered your book. I do intend to read it as well at some point. I'm not the fastest reader in the world. I want to say that right now.
That's okay. Thank you. Oh, I hope you like it.
Oh, I think I will by what we're talking about. It sounds really interesting. So you've always been drawn to the forgotten people, and we've kind of talked a little bit about why that is and things, because I feel the same way about it's us that need to be remembered as much as the kings and queens. So why did you want to focus on these women? Why just mostly Yorkshire, by the sounds of it?
The Yorkshire bit was for my dissertation years ago when I did Yorkshire, because I was at University of Hull. So that's why because we all had to pick something about Yorkshire. So that's why I did that. But I mean, Yorkshire's such a good place for the Wars of the Roses, because you've got like it's Middleham Castle, isn't it? And then you've got York, where it was all going on. And I mean, there's a lot of places. That would be quite cool to do like a little tour of Yorkshire actually, and go see all the places, because the Battle of Towton's Yorkshire, isn't it?
Yes,
I think. I'd love to go there. So the reason I picked these women were just people that had some sort of story to tell, and a lot of that also was people like Alice Montagu, who had connections with Yorkshire. I think she lived in Yorkshire for a bit, and she ended up getting attainted because she was fighting for York against the Lancastrians, and in the end Henry VI had her attainted with her husband and took all her lands. So that was quite shocking to have a woman, you know, listed in the attainder as one that we're going to go get, you know, because she's conspiring. That was quite cool. So it was literally anyone with any story. I just wanted to bring out lots of different stories, even people who were, while they were building fleets, because at one point Edward IV wanted to invade, I think it was France. Now my brain's gone, but anyway, he was building a fleet, and there was even women who were providing sails for the boats, or they were like loading on barrels of herring or things like that. Like, they had such a tiny part, but they were part of it. Like, we can't just ignore them. So yeah, I just really, I'm just quite passionate about bringing people back who we don't actually think of. Yeah,
and you are so right. Yeah, they are in everything. They are there for every little thing, and yet they're never recorded. They're not recognised. And some of that is to do with the fact it's their sex, but on one hand it's also because people at the time just didn't deem it as important to record it.
There was a lot of that in the medieval times, wasn't there? They didn't think the same, obviously, now as about women as we do. And there's like writings that I discovered, like handbooks to how to be happily married, and it was like, you must support your husband and everything because God put you both together, so you need to support each other and stay with him. And they did, a lot of them, they really did. They really fought, and they managed to get weapons. You know, there's women who was providing weapons for little local skirmishes and things. They really did. And but there was also the part where women were considered kind of a little bit weak and not able to do those things. So there's this weird double standard going on, where they're like, oh, you know, you must be good and obey your husband. And at the other side, they're like, well, you know, there's women raising arms and fighting and not letting people into their castles. And so, yeah, I mean, they weren't all, I think it's wrong to think that, like, the book isn't all the feisty women of the Wars of the Roses. There's women that played little subtle parts, like laundresses, you know, names of the women that were washing the king's laundry or making his silk tassels for his books, you know, all these things that gave him prestige and made him look good. But yeah, it's a really fascinating part of history.
Yeah. And I find that fascinating as well, like the double standards of it all, because it's like, if we go further back in history, one of the reasons why Boudica or Boadicea or whatever you want to refer to her as, the only reason why she's recorded is because in regards to, like, say, Roman history, women were seen as nothing but property, and that seems to be a similar sort of thing later down in the medieval era as well, in certain fields. But the reason why Boudica is remembered is because she was seen as this anomaly. It's just like, oh my god, this woman took up arms and fought? What the hell? So again, it's that interesting thing. It's that double standards, and it is very interesting, this perceived perception that people have had, because even in the medieval times, you know, we did have the Empress Matilda that came in, and she fought tooth and nail to try and be empress in her own right, and she was almost successful. And then unfortunately was gone at the very last second. But yeah, we've seen women do this. We've seen women take up arms for their husbands. We've seen women who have run the country while their husbands have been poorly, or their children are not old enough to run the country. And it's still very interesting that they still had this mindset of going, oh, but she's a feeble person who can't do anything. It's like, she's just proven that she can. So,
yeah. And do you know that they used that though, because there was a woman who was sent off to, because there was a part of the Wars of the Roses where George, Duke of Clarence, Edward IV's brother, he went to the side of the Earl of Warwick for Lancaster. So they kind of like, he switched sides for a little bit. But there was a woman that was sent over to see George, Duke of Clarence, who was supposed to have tried to get him back on the York side. So, but they just thought she was a gentlewoman. She said she was a gentlewoman of Isabel Neville, his wife. And it's written about it. So they used that. They were like, oh, no one would suspect you. So why don't you go off and try and talk to George, Duke of Clarence, and get him and all his army back? Yeah. So that's something. Like, they wouldn't have really suspected women to do that. Because if they'd just sent, I don't know, some well-known noble, they'd be like, what are you doing here? You're not coming in. Yeah.
It's just fascinating.
I should have called it Women's Tales of, I don't know, Skullduggery or something. There's so much of that going on. And then, of course, the Margaret Beaufort, when she was trying to fight to get Henry Tudor on the throne, Richard III didn't really take much action against her. He was just like, oh, well, I'll just tell her husband to sort of keep her at home for a while so she doesn't bother me. Like, she was very like intelligent and determined. Like, you'd expect him to have like maybe done something a bit more, but it just shows that he didn't think much should do much. She's like, oh, she'll be fine. Yeah.
Yeah, she's just his mother, no big what.
She's just yeah, exactly, no big deal. He didn't know. We'd all now be thinking, gosh, she was great. Yeah.
She was a major player. Yeah, well, it's interesting because, well, if you think of like Elizabeth Woodhull as well, like we've heard there's lots of like weird double standards as well. Like there's a lot of superstition surrounding her as well. Like a lot of people are like, oh, she's a witch, she's obviously bewitched the king and blah blah blah. But even she had ambitions. She managed to bag herself a king and produce an heir, and but yeah, she was discredited. It was like, oh, well, you're not good enough. You're just a woman. It's like, but you're obviously a witch, so clearly this is the only reason why you have some supernatural power. Clearly.
Yeah, and there was a problem as well with her mum, that they accused her of witchcraft, and it was actually nuns of an abbey, Sewardsley Abbey, who got actually involved in this, and they paraded around this little figure, like this little wire figure of a man, and somebody came and said, oh, this was made because it made the king fall in love with Elizabeth Woodville and it's all witchcraft. And it obviously is a Lancastrian like thing that they put out, like a little propaganda, but these nuns were said to have shown it to people. So if you went to Sewardsley Abbey, the nuns would get out this little thing and say, yeah, you can see it. So like even they're involved, the nuns. And then you've got this the Battle of Northampton that was fought next to an abbey, and I managed to find the abbess's name of the time was Gonora Doughton. Like, what was she doing? It was being fought in her meadow outside the abbey walls, and she probably was involved in. There was one account that says she was involved in burying the dead from the battle, but then a more modern historian said probably she wasn't, but well, she was there anyway because she was literally in the field of the battle. It was just the sort of women that you wouldn't expect to. You probably wouldn't think of nuns being involved in the Wars of the Roses. There was another nun who prayed for the peace of the realm because it was such a state. So yeah, it's like there's also this sort of hint of desperation of can everyone just stop fighting, please? And we just want to get back to normal. So yeah, but yeah, witchcraft and yeah. I think they just leveled that at people just because, like you say, they didn't think they were capable of a lot else. They were just this sort of sweet woman, but they definitely were capable.
Yeah. So yeah. So do you think you're going to do any more projects like this?
I do write on my blog a lot about forgotten people, which whenever I find one, I write it up and I research and find out. And I was at Romsey Abbey the last weekend in Hampshire in the New Forest, and so I loved it because I walked around the abbey and they've got an effigy there and it says, this effigy, we do not know who this lady is. So I was like, right, okay, let's see. So I wrote it down, took some pictures, and then when I got home I found out it was probably a local noblewoman, and her name's Joan, and you know, I managed to maybe find out it may be her who was the benefactress to the abbey. So I always love a challenge. But I've also got another book that I've finished and that's out next year on power couples of the Tudor era. So that's bringing out Tudor. It just felt right to go from the Wars of the Roses to Tudors. So it's bringing out couples and their influence on Tudor history. And the more that you delve into that, because we always think, oh, it's like Henry VII or Elizabeth of York, but what have they done together? What did they contribute together? And without their relationship, what wouldn't exist today? And that was quite cool to find out the effect they had on their age. So that's one I have coming out next year. And that was good fun.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting as well, because I suppose it kind of ties in with this first one about women, because it's like there's a popular saying out there, like something like behind every great man is an even greater woman, or something like that.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, and you know, and it was all about bringing out the person that isn't very well acknowledged, even if that was the man in the relationship, whichever. And so I brought that out in those cases too, and tried to like readdress the balance a bit. Yeah. So it is a lot like this book, but is on the Tudors, and it's bringing out both. Yeah, that was good fun.
Yeah, it sounds it. And whenabouts did you say it's coming out in 2025?
Yeah, next year. So far the date is June, but that can change because it's only just been sent off pretty much.
Oh, really nice.
Yeah,
I'll keep an eye out for that as well then.
Thank you. Yeah, I do love the Tudors. The Tudors is where it all began for me. I think when I was a kid, I was given this book on Henry VIII and his 6 wives, and I was just, oh my gosh, what time was this that people dressed like this? Like, it's not now. It really did my brain in. So yeah, I just was fascinated by their wives of Henry VIII, and it just went on from there. And I just became a fully fledged history nerd, like I am now.
Not wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all.
Nothing wrong with that. No, exactly.
So, have you done any other books prior to the Wars of the Roses one?
No, not history books. I was a food blogger for a while in my old. Well, when I got COVID, I lost my taste and smell, so I couldn't do that anymore because I couldn't develop recipes and stuff. I used to do that for brands. But no, I've done a couple of ebooks and stuff like that, but I've not ever written an actual full-length published book. This was the first one.
Oh, nice.
I enjoyed it a lot. I got into proper rabbit holes at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it's just like I can't go to bed because like I'm in the middle of this and I just found a new woman and I can't believe it. Like I couldn't go to bed. So, but it's a passion, isn't it? That's what happens when you. I hope it comes through in the book. So,
I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. Yeah, no, being able, just doing any form of research as well, like doing your DIS and all that things as well, it is fascinating because, the moment you learn something, you then find something else, and then you know that you want to stop, but you also can't stop, and
you're scared. I get scared to stop because then I lose the way I'm thinking, and then if I go, I found this lady in the calendar of patent rolls, but I'm just going to go to bed. I'll look at it in the morning. I'll just forget why I found her. So it was far better for me to just resolve it and then go to bed the next day or whatever it was. But it was such good fun. I really enjoyed it. I love writing and researching.
It seems like that's now becoming your path.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that'd be nice.
Oh, well, thank you for coming on here and talking about your book. Where can people find more information about you or find your book or anything like that?
The book is from the Pen and Sword website, so it's Pen and Sword Books website, and it's Forgotten Women of the Wars of the Roses, and I'm Jo Romero. I'm also on Instagram at Love British History Pics, and my blog is called Love British History.
Wonderful stuff. I'll put that all down below so people can find your book and find you on socials and stuff. Is there anything else you want to say about your project, your book, or anything like that before we sign off?
No, I mean, if this is a part of, the only thing I would say is if this is interesting to you, do give it a read and see what you think. And I'm always up for friendly debate. If you find more facts about a person that I didn't find, like, let me know, because together we can uncover this. And I just think it's such a vital part of history. Like, these people were there, and we might as well let everybody know they were there. So if you do, I really hope you all enjoy the book, and I hope you enjoy it. So yeah, that it's just doing it because I want people to enjoy and just like the stories. Thank you.
I'm sure I will definitely enjoy that. It's ticking a lot of my boxes by the sounds of it anyway, because it's medieval history and it's also women's history. It's just it just sounds really fascinating.
Great. Lovely.
Well, thank you for coming on this podcast.
Thank you.
And